My father didn't whisper it. He stood up during the reception, raised his glass like he was about to bless the room, and said it loud enough for every single person to hear. To my family, my son, and to this beautiful celebration. Though she's not truly my daughter, I wish her well. The words hung in the air like smoke you can't wave away. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks stopped moving. Even the band seemed to stumble over the next note. I sat there at the head table in my white dress, feeling 200 pairs of eyes swing toward me, waiting to see if I would shatter the way everyone expected. But something rose in me instead. Something that had been building quietly for years, waiting for exactly this moment. I didn't cry. I didn't stand. I didn't make a scene. I just looked at him across that decorated room and realized with perfect clarity that he had finally given me permission to do what I'd been too afraid to do my entire life. He thought he was humiliating me. He didn't know he was freeing me. The silence stretched longer than any silence should. It felt thick, heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. I stayed in my seat, hands folded calmly in my lap, breathing steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. People stopped chewing. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. My new husband reached for my hand under the table, but I didn't take it. Not yet. I needed to feel this moment completely. Someone near the back let out a nervous laugh, the kind that escapes when you don't know what else to do. Then they stopped abruptly, like they'd been elbowed. My father stood there, still holding his glass, looking pleased with himself. He thought he'd landed the blow. He thought everyone would move on, forget it, let it fade into the background noise of the celebration. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. I watched him scan the room, absorbing the discomfort like applause. That small, satisfied smile played at the corner of his mouth. The same smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up whenever he reminded me that I wasn't quite enough, wasn't quite his. The guests didn't know what to do with their faces. Some looked at me with pity. Others looked away entirely, pretending they hadn't heard what everyone had clearly heard. A few older relatives leaned toward each other, whispering behind their hands. I could see the conclusions forming in real time. Poor girl. Humiliated at her own wedding. How will she recover from this? They assumed I was destroyed. That sympathy moved through the room faster than understanding ever could. My father saw it too. He read the discomfort as validation, proof that his words still carried weight. That he still controlled the narrative, even here, even now. He lowered his glass slowly, nodding to himself like he'd accomplished something important. Then he sat back down, smoothing his jacket with the casual confidence of a man who believes he's untouchable. What he didn't see was the shift happening inside me. The final thread snapping. The last bit of hope I'd been clinging to finally letting go. He looked satisfied. Comfortable. Safe. He shouldn't have. This wasn't new. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a moment of poor judgment. This was a pattern I'd been living inside my entire life. Growing up, he never called me his daughter in public. I was introduced by name. Just my name. This is Maya. Never this is my daughter, Maya. That word was reserved for my half-brother, Lucas. The legacy child. The one who mattered. Lucas got the praise easily. Got the attention freely. Got introduced with pride and possession. My son rolled off my father's tongue like it belonged there. I was the other one. The dependable one. The quiet one who didn't ask for much and therefore didn't receive much either. But I was always needed. When things broke, I fixed them. When problems arose, I solved them. When money ran short, I filled the gaps. I learned early that my value wasn't in being loved. It was in being useful. So I made myself useful. Over and over. Year after year. Thinking maybe eventually it would be enough. Maybe eventually I'd earn the title I was born with. By the time I turned 22, I was quietly covering financial gaps I didn't create. It started with emergencies. A broken furnace. An unexpected tax bill. Medical expenses that insurance wouldn't touch. Just this once, my father would say, "I'll pay you back." He never did. Then the emergencies became habits. Regular requests that arrived without apology. Bills that somehow always found their way to my mailbox. Loans that were never called loans, just help that disappeared into his accounts and never came back to mine. My signature became routine on documents I barely read. Guarantor agreements. Co-signed loans. Emergency credit lines that I promised would only be used if absolutely necessary. They were always absolutely necessary. I told myself it was family. That this was what you did. That love sometimes looked like sacrifice, and sacrifice sometimes looked like this. But deep down, in the places I didn't let myself examine too closely, I knew the truth. I wasn't being loved. I was being used. And I was letting it happen because I still believed that maybe, someday, it would matter. So when I sent him the wedding invitation, it wasn't about tradition. It wasn't even about wanting him there. It was my last attempt to be publicly claimed. I thought maybe the ceremony would force something. That standing in front of everyone we knew, watching me walk down the aisle, seeing me build something real and permanent, might finally pull the words out of him that I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. My daughter. 2 simple words. That's all I wanted. I thought the formality of the occasion would matter. That witnesses would matter. That maybe, in that moment, surrounded by family and friends and the weight of tradition, he would choose me the way I'd always chosen him. I was so naive. He came to the wedding. He smiled in photos. He shook hands and made small talk and played the role of proud father without ever actually claiming the title. And then, when the moment came for toasts, he weaponized the one day I thought might be safe. He used my wedding reception to remind everyone exactly where I stood. While the guests moved back toward dancing, trying to pretend the toast hadn't happened, I excused myself quietly. My husband started to follow, but I touched his arm gently. "Give me a minute." I walked past the restrooms, past the coat check, into a quiet hallway near the kitchen entrance. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and made one call. It clear, calm instructions and one simple request, yes. Do it. Now. The voice on the other end confirmed. Asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. "It's done," they said. I ended the call. Took a breath. Smoothed my dress. Then I walked back into the reception like nothing had happened. My father was at the bar, laughing with my uncle, completely unaware that systems were already moving. That permissions were being revoked. That access was disappearing. He had no idea that the safety net he'd been standing on for years was being quietly removed, thread by thread. It started small. So small most people wouldn't have noticed. At the bar, my father pulled out his credit card to order another round of drinks for his table. The bartender swiped it once. Then twice. Then looked up apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir. This one's not going through. Do you have another?" My father frowned, annoyed, and handed over a different card. Same result. The bartender, now visibly uncomfortable, leaned in quietly. "Both are declining, sir. It might be a system issue. Would you like to try again later, or, never mind," my father snapped, waving him off. He forced a laugh, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Banks and their security protocols. Always freezing things at the worst times. But I saw it. The flicker of confusion. The tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The way he patted his pockets like maybe he'd find an explanation there. His confidence wavered. Just slightly. Just enough. He glanced around the room, checking if anyone had noticed. Most hadn't. They were too busy dancing, talking, celebrating. But I noticed. And he caught my eye across the room for just a second before looking away. He stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear. Through the window, I could see him pacing near the valet stand, one hand gesturing sharply as he spoke. The call ended faster than he expected. He pulled the phone away from his ear, stared at it like it had betrayed him, then shoved it back into his pocket. When he came back inside, something had changed. The smooth confidence was gone. Replaced by something tighter. More alert. He wasn't commanding the room anymore. He was scanning it, searching for answers in faces that didn't have them. He tried to catch my uncle's attention, but my uncle was already being pulled onto the dance floor by his wife. My father stood alone near the entrance, looking suddenly smaller than he had an hour ago. He walked toward his table slowly, like a man trying to look casual while his mind raced through possibilities. What had gone wrong? Why weren't the cards working? Why hadn't the bank answered? The questions were piling up faster than the answers. And I just stood there, watching him unravel in real time, feeling nothing but clarity. My aunt cornered me near the dessert table. Her face was tight with concern, voice low and urgent. "Maya, sweetheart. What's happening? Your father seems off. Is everything all right?" I smiled softly. The kind of smile you give when you're unburdening yourself from something heavy. "I'm stepping out of roles I've been carrying alone for a long time, Aunt Jean. That's all." Her face changed. Understanding moved through her eyes like light catching glass. She didn't ask what roles. She didn't ask why now. She'd been watching this family long enough to connect the dots herself. "Oh," she said quietly. Then again, softer, "Oh." She squeezed my hand once. Not in pity. In recognition. Like she'd been waiting years for me to do exactly this. "Good," she whispered. Then she walked away without asking another question. That's when I knew the truth was already spreading. Not through gossip. Through realization. People were remembering things. Noticing patterns they'd ignored before. Putting pieces together that suddenly made terrible sense. The room was recalibrating. Shifting its understanding of who I was and what had been happening in plain sight. I picked up a fork and tapped it gently against my glass. The sound cut through the music, through the conversations, through the noise. Everyone turned toward me. My father looked up sharply from across the room, something close to panic flashing in his eyes. I smiled warmly at the crowd. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. For celebrating with us. For being part of something so important." Heads nodded. A few people clapped. Then I continued, voice steady and calm. "I also want to let you know that as of tonight, I'm officially withdrawing from all family financial and legal obligations. Effective immediately." The room went still again. But this time it was different. This time the silence had weight behind it. "I've loved supporting my family," I said carefully. "But it's time I focus on building my own." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't point fingers. Didn't name names. I didn't have to. The faces in the room were already doing the math. Suddenly, names and numbers and years of quiet support were being remembered. Acknowledged. Understood. People stopped watching me. Their eyes slid past me and landed squarely on my father instead. He stood frozen near the back wall, face pale, jaw tight. You could see him trying to decide how to respond. Whether to laugh it off, dismiss it, turn it into a joke. But the room wouldn't let him. The energy had shifted. The narrative had changed hands. Questions formed in silence. How much had she been covering? For how long? Why didn't we know? My father opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. But no sound came out that could undo what had just been said. The guests recalibrated in real time, the way people do when a truth lands that they should have seen coming. Sympathy evaporated. Understanding took its place. My uncle's face hardened. My aunt crossed her arms. Cousins exchanged glances that said everything. My father tried to step forward, to reclaim control, to say something that would shift the room back in his favor. But nothing came. Because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make it worse. For the first time in my life, I watched my father lose authority in a room full of people who used to hand it to him freely. I kept my voice even, almost gentle. For those who didn't know, I'd been the financial guarantor behind several family assets for years. Properties. Credit lines. Loans. I didn't list amounts. Didn't name specifics. Didn't need to. The silence that followed confirmed everything. People shifted uncomfortably. A few turned toward my father, waiting for him to deny it. To correct the record. To explain how it wasn't like that. He said nothing. Because denying it would be a lie everyone could verify. And admitting it would expose just how much he'd taken while giving nothing back. He was trapped between two truths, both of which destroyed the image he'd spent decades building. My mother-in-law, sitting near the front, looked at me with something like awe. My husband's father shook his head slowly, the way you do when a suspicion you've quietly held finally gets confirmed. My father's authority didn't shatter. It just quietly fractured, spreading cracks through a foundation that had been hollow all along. And I stood there, calm and unburdened, watching it happen. My father finally tried to speak. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, lifting his chin the way he always did when he wanted to command a room. He started. Then stopped. Because he realized mid-sentence that there was no good way to finish it. Denying it would require him to call me a liar in front of 200 witnesses, many of whom probably already suspected the truth. Admitting it would confirm that he'd built his stability on my silence. He stood there, mouth half open, words dissolving before they could form. Someone coughed. A glass clinked softly against a table. The moment stretched, uncomfortable and exposing. Finally, he lowered his head slightly and stepped back, retreating into the crowd like a man trying to disappear without actually leaving. Control wasn't just slipping. It was gone. And everyone in that room knew it. They'd watched him stand up at the beginning of the night and declare I wasn't his daughter. Now they were watching him stand silent while I calmly dismantled the life he'd built on my back. He had nothing left to say. And for the first time I had nothing left to give him. He found me near the exit as I was saying goodbye to some guests. His hand closed around my elbow, not hard but firm, pulling me aside into a quieter corner. His voice was low, shaking with restrained fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I looked at him calmly. "I'm aligning my actions with your words." "You're embarrassing me," he hissed. "In front of everyone. At your own wedding." "You embarrassed yourself," I said quietly. "I just stopped covering for you." His face flushed red. "You need to fix this. Right now. Call whoever you called. Undo whatever you did." I shook my head slowly. "No. Maya, you told an entire room I'm not your daughter," I interrupted, my voice steady but sharp. "So I'm not acting like one anymore. That's all." He stared at me, jaw working, searching for leverage he no longer had. "You owe me," he finally said, voice desperate now. "After everything I've done for you." I almost laughed. "Almost. Everything you've done was for yourself. I was just the person you used to do it." He flinched. Actually flinched. "You ended our relationship tonight," I said, each word deliberate and clear. "When you stood up in front of everyone I care about and told them I wasn't yours. So I'm just making sure my actions match your words from now on." His face twisted, somewhere between rage and panic. "You can't do this." "I already did." "I'm your father." "No," I cut him off. "You made it very clear tonight that you're not." "And honestly?" "I'm relieved. Because it means I don't owe you anything anymore." He opened his mouth to argue, but I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You taught me this," I said. "You taught me that words have consequences. That actions have meaning. That when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them." His eyes widened slightly. Understanding finally breaking through. "You told me who I am to you tonight," I continued. "So now I'm telling you who you are to me. Nothing. You're nothing." He stood there, frozen, as the weight of permanence settled over him like a blanket he couldn't shake off. For once in his life, he had nothing to say. No argument. No manipulation. No leverage. Just silence. And the consequences he'd earned. Before the reception ended, his phone rang. I watched from across the room as he answered it, stepping quickly toward the exit again. This conversation was different. Longer. Angrier. His free hand moved sharply through the air, gesturing at nobody, arguing with someone who clearly wasn't listening. When he came back inside, he looked 10 years older. His attorney had called. The guarantees I'd provided over the years were being formally revoked. Accounts I'd co-signed were being frozen pending removal of my name. Credit lines I'd backed were being closed. The safety net I'd woven beneath him for over a decade was vanishing in real time. And without it, everything he'd built started to collapse. Properties he couldn't actually afford. Loans he couldn't actually cover. A lifestyle held together by my signature and my silence. Now both were gone. He looked around the room desperately, searching for someone to blame, someone to fix it, someone to make it stop. But there was no one. Just guests dancing and celebrating while his carefully constructed stability crumbled around him. Reality had finally arrived. And it wasn't kind. I left my own reception early. Not because I was running. Not because I was upset. But because I was done. My husband took my hand as we walked toward the exit, and this time I held it tight. We moved through the crowd together, past relatives who watched quietly, past friends who nodded with understanding, past my father who stood alone near the bar with a drink he couldn't pay for. I didn't shake. Didn't cry. Didn't look back. People stepped aside to let us pass, and in their faces I saw something I'd never seen directed at me before. Respect. Recognition. The quiet acknowledgement that I'd finally stopped carrying weight that was never mine to hold. My father stayed behind in that decorated room, surrounded by people who now understood exactly what kind of man he was. He still had his name. He still had his pride. But he no longer had me propping him up. No longer had my signature to fall back on. No longer had my silence to hide behind. I walked out married, claimed by someone who actually wanted me, and finally, completely unburdened. While behind me, my father stood alone with nothing holding him up but the truth he could no longer escape.